very much front and center and standard. It is basically all through it. So here's just some of the areas where it's touched on. Control of your processes. What's required depends on the process. How important is it? This is also good business. Things that are critical parameters, you're going to want tighter control on. Perhaps tighter manufacturing controls, tighter testing, tighter acceptance criteria. Could be any number of things. Outsourcing. It's not one size fits all. If I'm buying nuts and bolts from Acme Nut and Bolt Company, that's a relatively low risk component. If I'm buying PLCs that control the operation of the lift, that is a higher risk component. I want additional controls over those guys. We'll talk more about that when we get into vendor qualification. Software, we already touched on. Validation proportionate to the use of the software system. Now, the auditing to this standard is relatively new, so we don't have a ton of experience to look at. My opinion would be on the safe side, regardless of the risk, I would look at trying to get some level of validation of any software package that falls under that quality management system umbrella. How extensive that validation may be, there's some wiggle room. That's not an ironclad, not hard and fast. But I would lean that way rather than saying this is low risk, I don't need to validate it at all. It would not surprise me to have a notified body auditor take a different opinion and cite you for not having that validated. But you definitely want the risk assessment of here are my software packages that we're using, here's what they are doing, and here are the risks associated with what they are in fact doing. Training effectiveness. We'll touch a lot more on this in chapter 6. There are different ways to do that. Some are more time consuming than others. What you do is, again, a risk-based decision. The risk management process itself in terms of design, I'm going to wait until we get into that topic by itself. We'll talk about that in some detail. Purchasing. What level of control do I need? Now, purchasing is considered separately from vendor qualification and monitoring. Purchasing has fairly simple requirements. One, and this is obvious, document what you are intending to buy, because obviously if you don't, you're not going to get what you need, including anything in specifications, grades, so forth and so on. The other requirement is that in your purchasing documentation, however you elect to do it, you need a statement in there that says you, the supplier, may not change anything without my prior approval. This is important. It needs to be boilerplated on your purchase order, in your quality agreement. It needs to be specified. Auditors are going to look for that language. If it's not there, you're going to get a non-conformance. It's in the QSR, it's in ISO, and there's lots of good reasons for it. You guys recall, I don't know if you would, that this is the European, this is the reason why there's half the number of notified bodies that there used to be. The thing that caused the breast implant deaths in Europe was substitution of raw material. We've had, in fact, this just happened in the U.S., substitution of grades of PEG, polyethylene glycol, caused the death. This happens. Hey, it's a whole, in fact, this happened to me. I used to run a laboratory. We had 8 or 10 HPLCs running 24 hours a day. This is a fermentation facility. Purchasing took it upon themselves to change the grade of solvent that we needed from HPLC grade to tech grade. Well, tech grade's about half the cost. Unfortunately, if you feed that to an HPLC, it will roll over and die. So when it came in, we said, look at this, it's tech grade, send it back. Called the purchasing folks. That was the last time they did that because they almost got fired over it. This is really important to control. So, specify what you actually need on the purchase order and make sure that the vendor cannot substitute and is notified of that in writing. It needs to be, I would put it in the footer of the purchase order itself. That's almost always where I see it. But that is an ironclad requirement. Let's see, software we talked about. What do we get into risk management itself? All right, now we get into the nuts and bolts of documentation. If this doesn't work, if documentation, remember I said it's all about the documentation? If there's major issues with this, it really doesn't matter what else you do right. The investigators, inspectors, auditors are going to have a field day with you, and you're going to have massive problems. The actual requirements: quality policy, quality objectives. What's the difference? There's your quality policy, right where it should be. Notified body, folks, FDA does not do this, notified body does, so I did it last week. Expect to see that framed on the wall. Where you put it in the facility is up to you. I would definitely, wherever you're going to park the notified body auditor, put one in that room, even if it's just for that day. A lot of folks will put it in when you first enter the plant. Definitely have it posted. This is an ISO thing. Where does it say that in ISO? It doesn't. Will you get cited? Maybe. This is auditor discretion, but it's a very good idea to have it posted and put it in the room. Almost every audit I sit in, they ask for it. Now, that's quality policy. What are quality objectives? Quality objectives are your annual to-do list. These are the things that we hope to accomplish in the next, usually calendar year. You can do this any way you want. I don't think I would do it less frequently than annually. Quality objectives, some of them need to be specifically quality related. Others can be business related, strategic, what have you. Some of them need to be quality related. Some of them need to be objective and measurable. So things like assure that our customers all love us and think that we are the greatest providers on the planet. Is that okay as a quality objective? Is it measurable? Not really. Drop my first pass defect rate from 4% to 2.2% is a great quality objective. It's specific, it's measurable. I evaluate these in quality management, quality review. So if I set something like that, it has a metric. I can measure it. Did we meet it or not? Reduce my CAPA. I would never set a quality objective that says reduce the number of my CAPAs. An appropriate quality objective would be reduce the turnaround on them, or assure that we have some element of that process done with them within some specific time frame. Hopefully coincides with what your procedure says. So some of these need to be quality related and some of them need to have metrics. So these are typically established annually. ISO auditor will ask for them. Here you go. Here are our quality objectives for 2017. Obtain ISO certification by November. Is it quality related? Yes, it is. Does that have a metric? Yes, it does. So look at what you have. First of all, make sure you have some, but look at them. For some businesses, there might be 15 pages of these things. Great. For others, there's 2 or 3. Also fine. Doesn't matter, whatever fits your business, your operation, just make sure that one, they're established annually, some of them have metrics, and these things get reviewed in quality management review.
Do you have a medical device organization that you consider puts out great policy and quality objectives, like they just are one in the industry and they do it very well?
No, because this is so case specific. Your quality objectives are going to relate to your specific business. I see most of the ones I look at and always review these in an audit, most of them are fine. And we're only looking for two things. Are some of them, I don't care if you have 5 of them or you have 50 pages of them, are some of them quality related and are some of them measurable? Because if they're not measurable, how do you know if you met them or not? This is usually a fairly, where I write non-conformances for this is people don't have them at all, or they have these wishy-washy things that are completely unmeasurable, like make sure our customers love us and stand around and sing Kumbaya or something ridiculous like that. This is a pretty easy one to do. But do look at your quality objectives. Documented procedures as required. Are you required to have a procedure for every element in ISO? No. Sterilization. You've exempted sterilization. It doesn't apply to you. We don't expect you to have a process or a procedure on sterilization. There's no need for you to do that. Now, this is a nice to have. You outsource contract manufacturing, and I don't know for a fact, let's say you outsource all of your manufacturing. Chapter 7 is chock full of specific how to manufacture, how to handle non-conformances, for example, non-conforming product, I should say. Are you required to have that procedure? Not necessarily. However, when we create these systems, we usually create them even though the business does not do any of this. We'll create them anyway for 2 reasons. One, it's a roadmap to what they should expect their contractors to do, because these procedures are compliant with both ISO and FDA requirements today. They're constantly updated. So it's a great snapshot of what's required, in this case done by somebody else, so that when you go visit them, you know what they're supposed to be doing. The other reason we write them is if should you decide to bring this activity in-house, now you have the procedure. Would you be auditing against this? No. This is a nice to have nuance. So if you have outsourced some of these activities that you don't do at all, it's like complaint handling. You've outsourced that to somebody. In my opinion, that's not a great idea. But if you have, do you need a complaint procedure? It'd be a good idea. But how else are you going to hold them accountable? It's a nice thing. Records. We already talked about this. Records are your objective evidence of compliance. Chapter 4 goes into talking about how long they are maintained. There are regulatory requirements on that. FDA is 2 years. ISO is now 10. Implanables 15. IDBs are 10, I believe. Make sure that you're compliant with that. Other assurances that make sure that these records are safe and secure, not subject to, next time it comes down here, they don't get flooded. You lose them, you're in trouble. So make sure that you can maintain them. How must you maintain them? Any way you want. You have electronic system? Great. Make sure you have it backed up. If you keep this stuff on your server, lightning strikes the plant, fries the server, and that's the only place these records are, and they're only electronic, you have a big problem. So make sure that you have appropriate backup and security. How you do that's up to you. Lots of different ways. Lots of people do this differently. Same thing if you have only hard copy. That's getting rare anymore. Back in the day, we had rooms for it, but records that are only in hard copy, same requirement. Make sure it's safe and secure. If it's only hard copy, that normally means fireproof filing. These things are expensive and they weigh 85 tons. Most people may have a combination. Some hard copy, some electronic. Make sure they're backed up and secure. Your specified regulatory documents, called external documents. Under ISO, you are required to physically have these or access to them. So, the common external documents, the QSR. QSR is online. You need to print it and have a copy of it in your hot little hands? No. Can you access it? Sure. FDA.gov, there it is. I can pull up the QSR anytime. Need internet access, but that's readily available to me. How about ISO? 1345, external document, required to have it. It's available online. No, it's not. ISO is very proud of these standards. They make you pay for them. Are they cheap? No, they're not cheap. ISO 13485, ISO 19011 for your auditors. Any of the specific product standards you might have, the electrical safety 60601-1, 60601-1-2, EMC, either you or your test lab. But the ISO auditor is going to look at these and is going to ask you, particularly for a, demonstrate that you have a physical copy of at least 13485. The other one that they'll ask for frequently is 14971, which is the risk management standard.
Which one was that?
Risk management, 14971, you should have, because there's two versions of it, by the way, which we'll talk more about.
We have that.
13485 are the two they'll ask for one or the other, or possibly both. I'm almost guaranteed they'll ask you for 1345. If you can show it to them on the computer, that's good enough. You don't need to have a printed copy. You do have to have it. Otherwise, how do you know what it requires? But I see people cite it all the time. Yeah, we're ISO certified. Where's your copy? Oh, here's 2003, but you're trying to get certified in 2016. Where is it? Oh, well, we didn't buy it. Oops. So make sure you have a copy of these standards. And it is a judgment call about, gee, how far down do I need this? If you're not doing the testing, then your test lab certainly has the electrical safety standards. As I said, there are thousands of these things. You're not expected to spend $70 buying all of them. MDR, MDD, online. The MedDevs are available online. In your master document list, you should have these listed. Which external standards are applicable for us? 1345, yes. 971, yes, both versions. Maybe the electrical safeties, but probably not. 19011 auditing, yes. So the MedDevs that are applicable, we'll talk more about those later. Those are European guidance documents. QSR, FDA guidance documents, all of those are available online. So you should have a listing of these as applicable to you. And for the ones that you cannot access online, like ISOs, either hard copy or electronic. I guarantee they'll ask for it. Okay, questions? Make sense?
You're saying MedDev?
MedDev, M-E-D-D-E-V. There's a bunch of them. These are European guidance documents. How do I conduct a literature review for my clinical evaluation is one of them. How do I do advisory notices is another. There's a whole host of them. Your procedures on those topics would list those. That's how you would know. How do we do vigilance and advisory notice? That thing ought to reference the applicable method. Probably does. Okay. Now we're getting down into specific documents. Quality manual. Quality manual points to, basically is a high-level overview document. Is it a requirement? Yes, it is. You need a document called a quality manual. In it, it should define the scope of the quality management system. What's applicable to you, more importantly, what's not. Those are exclusions we talked about earlier. Where do you market? Because that defines what's applicable. Market in Australia, the TGA is applicable. Market in Canada, Health Canada, CMDR, Canadian Medical Device Regulations are applicable. Market in the US, QSR is applicable. As we already spoke of, the exclusions, non-applicability, sterility in your case. You can bother with it, unfortunately. Either the documented procedures, which nobody does, or references to them. In the quality manual that we create, it goes through the entire ISO standard, and all it does is reference the procedure on that topic. You don't want to keep a second copy of these things. In fact, I would suggest that you don't, because now you have to keep all of them in sync with each other. Bad idea. So just reference it. In our, I don't know how you number your documents, but in the section that talks about change control, our change control procedure is QSB 4.2.4 now. So just reference the thing. Big pointer. There's several places where you do this. The tech file is another. Description of process interaction, I talked about. We put that in as an appendix at the end of the quality manual, and it's just a graphic of showing what interfaces. Anymore, it's almost starting to look like spaghetti because everything interfaces with everything else. Risk management, for example, interfaces with all kinds of stuff. So this is a graphic, or any other way you want to do it, of how you manage to do this. Outline of the structure, we have a procedure for that. We would just reference it. But you have a quality manual. The quality manual is a control document. It should carry a document number, QM01 or whatever you choose to call it, Rev, whatever. And as we're talking about these procedures, these are all control documents. They all carry document numbers, however you've elected to do that, and revisions. Auditors, both FDA and ISO, will always check that because they're required to make their notes on which version that they looked at. If they cite you for some non-compliance, find out that they're looking at an obsolete rev, then that may not be applicable. Hopefully you never give them an obsolete rev. Medical device file. Brand new requirement. This is an ISO 13485 2016. This thing never existed prior to the brand new version of ISO. This is the European version of the Master Device Record, the DMR, which has been a US requirement for a long time. Basically, this is a compilation of everything I need to know to make your product.
So is this equivalent, I mean, from a structure and content standpoint, equivalent to the FDA?
Very similar. There are a couple of very minor differences between the medical device file and the DMR. I would say 95% of the content is the same. There are a couple of European specific differences in the medical device file. At your option, you should already have a procedure that says this is, pardon me, this is how we do our medical device file, DMR. At your option, you could incorporate this into that procedure, or you can make it standalone, makes no difference. I do it both ways. A couple of very minor differences. GMDN code, for example, is a European product code. It doesn't exist on the US side. That appears in the medical device file. In the medical device file, you would reference your vigilance procedure. Vigilance is a EU-only process. It wouldn't show up in your DMR. That's a US-centric document. So there are some differences, but they're relatively minor. It is a requirement under the 2016 standard. You must have this thing, whether you combine it with the DMR or however you will have to do it, but it is a requirement. General description of the product. This is where I reference all my product specs, the bill of material. There is a great deal of duplication between this and the tech file. They all reference the same. That's why you don't want to incorporate these documents, most of them, in here. You reference them. You do not want multiple versions of the same document. Let's take a label specification, for example. I could put my the actual label specification in my medical device file. I would put a copy of it in my device master record. I would have a copy of it in my tech file. I might have it in the design history file. Now I've got this document living in at least 4 different places. How in the world am I going to keep up with that if I update that thing? I'm not probably going to do a good job, which is why we reference label specification rather than incorporated, because otherwise you chase your tail keeping up with these things forever. Documents can be any form, any media, your choice. A lot of people have shied away from electronic documents for a long time because they live in fear of 21 CFR 11, which used to be a big deal. It really isn't anymore. Validation, unless you're running an open system, and nobody does that. This is where I can sit at home and access your quality management system. Not going to happen. Your systems are already controllable. You have, to log into what's on your server, you have to have ID and password to do that, and then some of these documents have a level of security over that. That takes care of most of what 21 CFR 11 wants to do anyway. This is not the big deal it used to be. So formal validation, unless you had built this thing yourself, which is a different animal, it's not that big a deal. So I don't automatically exclude that because you think it's so difficult to do. Same thing is true with electronic signatures. That used to be a big deal too. Now Adobe gives it to you for free. Not difficult to do. I haven't built a paper-based system in probably 5 or 6 years. Everything we're creating new is all electronic. Questions? All right. Doc control. Doc control is a critical process. Much of this appears in change control, but review and approval of your procedures prior to issuing them is a critical factor, and the folks that do that should be the subject matter experts. For revision needs to be the same, not necessarily the same individuals, but the same function that approved the original version. That's actually in the standard itself. It's also on the FDA side. Identification of changes in rev control. We already touched on this. These documents should all carry rev numbers. Doesn't matter how you do it. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, 1, 2, 3, 4, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, I don't care. Makes no difference. As long as you can identify one rev to the next. Critically important. Relevant versions available. This can get interesting and is difficult to manage if you have a paper-based system, because these procedures need to be available to different parts of your operation. The manufacturing work instructions, for example, need to be available to the folks doing the work. Change control needs to be available to everybody. So how do you do that? Well, back in the day, particularly when I worked in pharma, we had 2 people whose sole job was to take hard copy documents and distribute them through probably the 40 or 50 binders that were out there in the plant. This facility made 203 different products, 700 people, 3-shift operation. It was a huge deal just to keep up with this. So paper-based systems have some downside. Electronic system, these things live on a server. Anybody can access them from various points throughout your facility. Takes care of a lot of that. But they have to be available, legible, identifiable. Most systems take care of all that for you. You need to know if you distribute them locally and it's not done on the server, you need to know where they are. Otherwise, how would you replace them when you update it? So if you have a paper-based system, you need to know that I've got a copy of this procedure here, here, and here, so when I do a rev, I can go get the old one and replace it with the new one. Server-based, you don't have to do that. You just make sure that the old one's taken offline, put it in an archive somewhere. It's not accessible to anybody outside of QA, where it lives forever, and the new one is put up on the server. It makes life a lot easier. Defined period for document retention. This is a regulatory. There are 2 different standards here, one for the US. The US is 2 years. This is 2 years after the distribution of the device. if you distribute in multiple markets, Canada, the EU, etc., make your life simple. Just set it at the longest period, which is now 10 years. And if you have an electronic system for at least most of these, this is no big deal anyway. It used to be a very big deal when you had all this paper and box after box after box of records. You know, you can only keep those things so long. We filled up not only our own storeroom, but an off-site storeroom as well with batch records. At some point, you have to purge them just to make more room. Electronic system, not so much. How many records do you think I can keep on this little flash drive? You call it any terabyte flash drives now. You keep years of records on one of those. So, give some thought to how you do that. But there is a minimum retention time. I would go with 10 years, minimum. Now, many people, and I'm just going to point this out as a caveat, many people say, I'm not going to bother with it. I'm not going to bother with having to figure out how old these things are and then purge them, which is okay. You can keep them forever. There's a downside to that, potentially. At least in the US, if you're hit with a civil suit, if you have that record, even if it's 15 years old, you have to produce it. So if you keep stuff forever, it's subject to discovery. Talk to your legal people. Whereas if you have a procedure and process that says we purge records after 10 years, and you actually do it, but that's something for you to weigh. The benefits of that may not outweigh the difficulty in going through and purging this stuff. Just something I want to point out, that keeping records forever has a potential downside. Good documentation practices. They are applicable. This is universal, pretty much the same set of, and this has been forever. If you have guys out there doing assembly, assuming you do that here, are they allowed to record whatever data they need to be recording in pencil? New. Crayon? New. Ink. Permanent ink. How about corrections? This particularly applies to electronic systems. How do you do a correction? You cannot obliterate the original entry. Now with a paper-based system, then all you have to do is teach people not to, completely scribble over what the original was. On a electronic, it's a little more difficult because, what are we going to do? Delete, 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 delete. Now the original's completely gone. So no, I don't want to do that. If I have to change an original electronic record, I line it out, keep it, and then correct it. Don't delete it. Now, it's possible, depending on the system, it might be able to be recreated, but it might not. So, electronic records, pay attention to that. You train your people not to delete the wrong entry, but to strike it out. And it needs to be legible. Okay, enough said on that. Purple crayon is not a good idea. This has been around forever. This just graphically shows how the documentation system functions. Top level, quality management, quality manual, that's policy. Used to be we had a whole bunch of policies and then a whole bunch of procedures, and the overlap between them was extensive and it really was a duplication of effort. So in a modern system, we always have a quality manual which includes the quality policy, but that's really our policy level document. Then everything else ends up being a procedure. Some businesses find they have a need for a small number of policies, fine. Most of the time, I would argue what you really want is procedure. Next level down out of procedures, optional job instructions. These are work instructions. These are real detail. Where they particularly come into play is if you're doing manufacturing, and let's say you have 2 or 3 different machines that do the same thing. Well, my procedure is not going to be specific unless it's going to be, encyclopedia. I would write a work instruction. How to do this with this machine. How to do this with this other machine. How to do this with my third mission. For people that don't do in-house manufacturing, where I frequently see work instructions on return goods. How do we bring stuff back into the organization to do service on or credits or whatever? That typically will be a work instruction. Give you an interesting one I saw a couple of years ago. This company makes a device, I don't remember exactly what it actually did, but it would have a little probe, and that probe would actually go into the skin. And I forget what it was supposed to be doing. They would get this thing back for service or whatever, come back to the facility, and the facility is actually not that far from here. So I went out and visited with the fellow that received these. I said, okay, so you get this probe coming back in from the user, and this thing has been inserted into the body. So what kind of decontamination process do you have? Show me the work instruction for that. And all I got was a blank stare. You gotta be kidding me, you know. Stuff's coming in with bloodborne pathogen issues all over it. These folks do not have any instruction whatsoever for how to deal with this. So I went back to the quality manager and said, by the way, how many employees have you killed? You know, but people ending up with hepatitis and who knows what. I said, well, so far none. I said, yeah, OSHA would shut you down if they were to see this. So you guys need a work instruction for when stuff comes in from the field, how do we decontaminate it to eliminate the bloodborne pathogen possibility. I don't know if you get equipment back in from the field or not. If you do, you should be thinking about this possibility. Because you've got stuff that's in patient use, who knows what might happen to it while it's in the patient's hands. You certainly want a work instruction to consider that. You probably already have one. So that's what work instructions are. The fundamental under that, these are all my records. Records are objective evidence of compliance. They are your best friend. All right. Control of records. Hey, there's objective evidence of conformance again, and compliance. Records established and maintained, we already talked about this. This is what you are going to show to the auditor, the FDA, whomever, that, yeah, we do it right, here's the proof. This procedure talks about how you identify your records, how do we do storage and protection, retrieval, retention, protection of confidential health information. Rarely, there might be a possibility for you for stuff coming back. That doesn't impact a lot, and it's not really that big a deal. You just have to be careful that you're not identifying individuals by name or anything else that's readily identifiable. Where this typically comes up is businesses are running clinicals, but they already have their clinical processes for that. It is not that big a deal. Just make sure that patient information is not widely spread. Disposition. Disposition is the term for what's the decision on this product. Is it acceptable, not acceptable, rework, whatever it may be. It needs to be very clearly, we'll talk more about this in chapter 7, really clearly defined, described, and who made that decision. Medical device is interesting in that, according to the regulations, almost anybody can assign a disposition to a product. I have seen businesses where the warehouse guy does that. Gives me the EBGs when I see it, but it's not contrary to the regulation. Farm is different. Farm is defined, has to be the quality control unit. I would argue that that's good practice, but whoever does it needs to be defined, some data. Record retention, we already talked about. Questions? All right, let's see, exercise 1. Let's go, oh, this will be, take this right to lunch, too. All right. You have exercise 1?
We do.
You do. let's see, yeah, you have it, so I'm not even gonna put it on the screen. That way I don't have to toggle back and forth. The QSR or 1345 specifies the quality requirement for a product, true, false? False. Quality management system is foundational. It's fundamental to a product, any medical device product. So no, it doesn't describe the quality requirements. That's done in product-specific documentations, but not the quality management system. QSR or 1345 manufacturing companies. Well, I talked about that. It applies to all kinds of associated companies depending on what they do. QSR 1345 defines the requirements for a quality management system. True, false? True. Quality is responsibility of the inspection department. False. Quality is responsibility of whom?
Everyone.
Everybody. That's a 9,001 truism. Good quality management system can return savings and improve quality.
True.
Absolutely true. One of the things I always bring up when I'm getting some pushback from senior management to say, really don't want to spend the money that this entails, not like they have a choice, is this is good business. Now, a QSR/1345 compliance system is good business, regardless of the fact that it's a regulatory requirement. It's good business. It will provide you with returns. Customer focused responsibility of salespeople. Should read only the salespeople. Yeah, it's the focus of the sales and everybody else. Quality records or documents describing how to do things right. Second word there. Records.
Just a record.
What are records?
Evidence.
Evidence of what we did. So no, they don't describe how to do things right, they describe what we did. False. Work instructions are only guidelines.
False.
Work instructions are controlled documents. They have no significant distinction between procedures. They are not guidelines. Thou must do it. While we're on that topic, auditors are looking at a number of different perspectives. At the highest level, they're looking at your operation in your system relative to the standard and the QSR, and whatever other regulations may apply, MDD, CMDR, whatever. They're also looking at your procedural requirements. Both are equally important, and I see this occasionally. The procedure is compliant with the standard, but the company has gone over and above and written a quality procedure. For example, management review is a great example. So how often did we say you're expected to do management review, even though it's not in the standard? Annually. Company goes and writes a procedure, says we'll do it 4 times a year. Does it once, say, you know what, this is an amazing amount of work, and we're not going to waste all that time doing this 4 times a year. Doesn't change the procedure. They're cited. They're compliant with the standard. They're still doing it once a year. They're not compliant with their own procedure. That counts just as much. I'll write them up in a heartbeat. And I've seen that particular one a bunch of times. Yeah, we'll do. We're going to be so good. We'll do management review 4 times a year. Well, that happens maybe once or twice. Management review is a lot of work. Now, we only need to do it once, but they don't change the procedure. That's a non-conformance. Identification of parts through the process can be a requirement. True, false?
True.
True. Should be reworded. Must be identified throughout the process. We do not need to get into statistical analysis because our product is very easy to produce.
Come on.
It's not always just about production. There's lots of stats that you should keep and upload to management review, APAs and all kinds of complaint data, all kinds of things. Contract review does not apply to us because we only fill orders over the phone.
False.
Internal audits are for accounting reasons.
False.
Internal audits are, we'll talk about this later, chapter 8. They are an ironclad requirement. You must do them. And, as I said, we'll touch a lot more on this. Internal audits are reviewable. Now, the FDA, through their own internal process, elects not to do that. Their thinking is, and I don't agree with this, but their thinking is that if you know the FDA is going to review your audit reports, you are less likely to be diligent. I don't think that's a valid consideration. Notified body doesn't think that at all. They not only have access to your audit reports, they guarantee you they are going to review them in detail. It's one of the reasons that we do audits the way we do them, all 54 pages of data.
So how under MDSAP is that going to be accepted if FDA, under MDSAP, if FDA is doing your audit and they're not looking at it, but it's required by the other bodies, how's that being
Great
addressed?
question. Under MedSap, remember we said that the audit reports are distributed to all of the members, which means the FDA now has a copy of your audit report. Absolutely do. And there's no way that the FDA is going to say, we're not going to come audit you because you were audited under MedSap, even though we didn't bother to read the report.
Yeah.
They're not going to do that. So this is my opinion, this silly distinction between the FDA doesn't look at your audit reports is probably going to fade away. If I were you, I wouldn't pay attention to that anyway. A lot of people jump through all kinds of hoops. Oh, I can't let the FDA look at it. Notified body's going to look at it. FDA can look at it. They just choose not to. They're legally permitted to look at it. Yep. They get a come back with a subpoena if they have to. Let's see, where do we go? Non-conformance is when a part is wrong.
He's getting one.
I'm sorry. Internal audits are for measuring employee
My favorite one.
performance.
False.
Bad idea. Internal audits are for measuring performance of the quality management system.
Could only wish.
While I'm thinking about this, we're talking about employee performance. What document is that? What document gets made when you're looking at that? Annual performance review, right? If you were, and I see this in training, we're looking at training effectiveness and competence. Do not, check your procedure for this, do not state in your procedure that the annual performance review is evidence of employee competence. Why not? In fact, it is, but if you put that in your procedure, you just put the employee's performance appraisal on the table for the FDA and the notified body. What else is in your annual performance review? Salary, does not play well with others, was sent to drug rehab. I mean, there can be all kinds of stuff in the annual performance review that has nothing to do with training. No, that is a terrible document. I see a lot of people do this because they don't think about it. That's a terrible document. We'll talk about how to do this later, but the employee performance appraisal, although it does touch on job performance, it touches on a whole lot of other things that you just should not have an external auditor reviewing. And there is a lot of personal and confidential stuff potentially in there that you don't want a third party to have access to. So that's a really bad idea.
It would also make those a discoverable item in a legal matter.
Probably, yes. Good point. So, it's a simple matter. It's only a problem if you created it for yourself. I've never heard either FDA or any other auditor ask for it because you would rightly refuse. However, just for grins, if you put that in your procedure, I'm going to ask you for it and then watch your HR lady's head explode when I can insist that she bring it. She's going to fly around the room. All right. Non-conformance is when a part is wrong. Generally false. Non-conformance can be non-conformance to lots of things. under non-conformance, what the standard and what FDA focuses on is non-conforming pieces and parts and product. But non-conformance itself is a broader topic. Non-conformance only applies to our suppliers. No. Non-conformance going anywhere in the process, obviously true. Let's skip the next one, so I already made this point. Corrective action helps us to prevent problems from reoccurring. True. Preventative action is the same as corrective action.
False.
This is an easy distinction. Corrective, something I didn't wish to happen, happened. Preventative, something that I recognize there's a potential it might happen, I wish to prevent it from happening. So I don't have to deal with it as a corrective. Continuous improvement is impossible. How can you keep improving? False. That's a 9001. The word continuous improvement, to the best of my recollection, does not appear in 13485. It is a 9001 concept, but that doesn't mean it's unimportant. It should be part of your process. You're just not held accountable to it specifically under 13485. Good job. All right. What's that? Hey, it still works. All right, it's 11:46. We got a little bit of time. All right, chapters 4 and chapter 5 are fairly straightforward. Both are fairly short, but critically important. The big hitter in chapter 4 is change control. In ISO, it's 4.2, it's now 4.2.4. It used to be 4.2-3. If you do, and I tell my FDA people this all the time, if you do nothing else right, make sure you get change control right, because if you don't, the FDA will rapidly conclude that you're out of control and then really bad things happen, consent decrees, all kinds of unpleasantness. So in chapter 4, it's all important. It's not to say that, some of it is unimportant. Change control is critically important because your documentation, your documents define how you operate, right? So if you are making willy-nilly changes to that without the proper review, you are by definition out of control. So pay particular attention to that. We'll touch on this one when we get to training here in a bit. That's why I recommend that the change control procedure is trained to every employee. They don't need to know the nuts and bolts of, how do I fill out the form, but they absolutely have to understand that if we have a procedure or a work instruction on it, I have to follow it. In the spirit of continuous improvement, I can't change it because I think I have a better idea. There's a process for that. It's called change control. So write up your process, submit it, let people review it. If it's really a better idea, we'll incorporate it. But you cannot change it on the fly. That's a fireable offense in many companies. It gets you and the company in big trouble. It's really foundational. It's critical.
Do you think continuous improvement is now not included in 1345 as it was in, 9001 because of the lean concept and having to go through that entire process versus a corrective action?
I suspect that the documentation of CI was more trouble than it was worth. That's why they don't incorporate it. It's never been, as far as I can recall, it's never been incorporated in 1345. It is in 9001. So if you are keeping both certifications, you still want a process around it. You're still going to be asked for those documents. It should be part of your philosophy, but as a specific auditable item under 1345, it's not there. Good question. All right, management commitment. We talked about this conceptually already. Top management must provide evidence of commitment to the development and implementation of the quality management system and maintaining its effectiveness. What's their primary method for doing that? Management review. We'll talk about that in a second. Other ways, maybe not so immediately obvious or documented, resource, training. The fact that you guys are sitting in on this training all week, that's management commitment. We care enough to make sure that things are done right, that, we're gonna spend significant resources to provide, education and training on these topics. That's a great evidence of commitment to maintaining the effectiveness quality management system. Quality management system itself. Did you write it? Fine. Did you contract somebody else to write it? Fine, so long as it's compliant and up to date. However you do it, it's all good. All of that is a commitment. Communication, the importance of meeting customer regulatory requirements. Management review is one way. There are any number of other ways, and no one is going to audit you against your weekly newsletter that you point out. Sorry, that you might publish. That's all fine. The ways that I frequently see are as we walk through the facility, bulletin boards, whiteboards that are up, here's our quality objectives, defective parts, here's the goal, here's where we are, all kinds of opportunities like that. It's not a requirement. Nobody's checking the box if you have it or don't have it. It's nice to have. Where it makes sense for you, where it's applicable to your situation. We'll touch again on this. We'll look at metrics. For the metrics that are useful, by all means, make sure that they're available to folks so they know how they're doing it. There's any number of ways to do it. Establish quality policy and quality objectives. We already talked about. Communication, importance of meeting customer regulatory requirements. One of the things we're doing here. Another way to do that is audit. You do that in management review. There is no requirement, this is my opinion, there is no requirement in management, in medical device regs for routine regulatory training and update. There is in pharma. In pharma, it must be annual. You are to retrain to 21 CFR 211, which is pharmaceutical GMP, every year. Mandated, documented. No such requirement in medical device. I think it's a really good idea. An annual review of 13485, the QSR, what have you. You do it internally is fine. A really good idea. No one's going to cite you if you don't do it, but it'd be a nice thing to point to is that, yeah, this is one of our methods for doing this. We have a plant-wide update on the QSR and 1345. What's changed? There are a number of changes coming. MDR is coming. NSAP is coming. So, yeah, good opportunities if you choose to take advantage of them. Provide adequate resources we talked about. This is always on the audit list. It's very subjective. Let's say you make 35 different products and there's all kinds of high-tech stuff going on there, but you have no quality department. That's problematic. This is real subjective. It's auditor discretion. Do we think as auditors that you have resources adequate to what you are doing? You outsource all your manufacturing? I don't expect to have all that many people. So this will become self-evident if your resources are not adequate because you won't be able to operate effectively. Availability of resources and management review, which we'll touch more on in a second. Ensure customer requirements are identified and achieved. There is a process for this highly dependent on your specific situation, your specific product. How do you do this? For most companies, this is a review of what the customer ordered versus what I am sending them. For those companies that manufacture standard items, which is the majority of them, you ordered 500 boxes of this bandage, and by golly, that's what we sent you. Customer requirements are identified and achieved. It's a little trickier when you custom manufacture. And the customer can say, I want this chair with this color upholstery and a lift that will handle X number of pounds. If they can mix and match requirements, then your process needs to be able to capture, track, and assure that that's what's going to the customer. How do you do that? Are there opportunities for them to mix and match, or is it basically, select the product and it goes out in one configuration?
Well, we have beds that are a standard bed, but it's configurable,
Uh-huh.
so everything's built to order.
Okay.
So you get an order and cut. There's
So
some
you guys
things that
are-
are, there's some things we make to stock, but most of the stuff is built to order.
So you guys are the second situation. So in an audit, be prepared to show the interface between what the customer said they wanted matches what you actually provided them. They will ask.
We define it as service complaints, and we track what the customer got, whether they got all they wanted, too many, not enough, the
Yeah.
wrong thing, freight damage.
But they'll also look at the front end. So when it went out the door, what process did you have to make sure that you were sending them what they asked for?
Yep.
Now, the back end is a different consideration, which also we looked at, but from the front end to prevent a service call, customer complaint, was there a review lots of various ways to do this, but is there a review before the product goes on the truck of here's what they want and here's what they got?
Yep.
Cool. Okay. Applicable regulatory requirements are met. Well, to do that, you've got to know what your regulatory requirements are. So that needs to be carefully defined. And again, as we said earlier, where do we put that? Quality manual. What is our set of what's our regulatory environment? 1345, 2016, QSR, MDD,
CMD.
CPR Canada, TTA Australia, and any number of others that you may have, depending on where you're marketing. Brazil. Y'all do business in Brazil?
Not yet.
Be prepared.
Yep.
And it's getting better. And Visa used to have a deal where they required a on-site inspection by their people. Unfortunately, they never staffed up to be able to do it. So getting their inspection done was a mess. South Korea started doing the same thing, gave up after 2 years, wasn't working. Quality policy we already talked about. This is top management. This is the motherhood and apple pie. It should generally always include, and I can't read it from here, but it should generally always include a commitment to regulatory compliance. I wouldn't be real specific in there and spell out the regulations they change, but just some general statement, assure customer satisfaction and compliance with applicable regulations, something like that. Reviewed for continuing suitability. This is one of the bullet points in management review. Yep, it's still good. They haven't changed it in 20 years, it's all good. Commitment to comply, which is what I was just talking about, put in the quality policy. And it provides the basis for your quality objectives, which we already talked about. Planning, and we're just about lunchtime here. Planning is an interesting deal. It's in the QSR. It's also in ISO. It really has two different meanings. Quality planning, as used by FDA, they use that term to talk about the sum total of all of the activities that you conduct to make sure that the product meets its individual specifications and requirements. So that's one aspect of quality planning. You already have that. It's in the assembly instructions or the travel or whatever you call it. All the various things that are done either by you or your contractor to make sure that when we build something, it meets its requirements, whatever they may be. The other element of quality planning is more project related. We see that the Europeans are making this transition from the MDD to the MDR. What does that mean for us? And what do we do about it? A better example would have been the transition from 1345-2003 to the 2016 version. That thing's coming down the road at us. What do we need to do to make sure that we can accommodate that change? We do a gap analysis. Where are the gaps in our present system compared to the old standard versus what do we need for the new one? So there's two different elements to this. Normal, standard, how do we build and inspect product, and then the project, project-oriented, how do we manage these, large changes? Quality planning, we added a new plant, we added a new product. All this stuff has quality planning aspects to it. Maintain integrity, quality management system. How do we do that? Change control, that we talked about. All right, it's hitting in, we might be able to knock off management view here for chapter 5. That'd be a great stopping point. Responsibility, authority, define, document, communicate. How do we do that? Org chart. Now, medical device does not have the strict separation between quality and operations. It is not as strict. It is not good practice if you have a quality group or whoever is in charge of quality to report to operations. Why not?
Because you can tell them what to do.
It's an inherent conflict of interest. Now, how about, I've got lots of clients, 3 or 4 people. Now what? In many cases, and this is acceptable, you might have the quality manager, if you have one, or the MR, management rep, which we'll talk about, maybe the only person they can report to. They have a dotted line to somebody else. It's enforced a lot tighter in pharma, but it is consideration of the device. Make sure that quality has the independence and separation from the day-to-day operational. They do need to have independence. Adequate internal communication we talked about. Now, this thing called MR, Management Representative, it's specifically defined in the regulation as a member of management who, irrespective of everything else they're supposed to do, is basically in charge, has overall control over the quality system. So, can I name a supervisor as my MR? No. I just saw FDA write somebody up for that. I have a warning letter, actually. I had some other issues too. No, member of management. So, doesn't matter who it is, can be manager, can be VP, frequently it's the CEO, small company. Doesn't matter, but it needs to be a member of management. And that individual certainly can delegate a lot of things, but they hold ultimate responsibility. Is there a counterpart to this in pharma? This is unique to medical device. Pharma has a specific requirement to have a quality control unit. There is no such requirement in medical device. You don't have to have a quality department. For a larger company such as you guys, it's a really good idea. Doc control, quality management, quality engineering, not a specific requirement. All right, let's touch on management review and then that'll be a great stopping point. This is an ironclad requirement. We must do it. It must be documented. There are something like 12 or 13, maybe 14 individual topics that must be covered. Look at your procedure. Your procedure should itemize these specific topics that must be covered. Go look at the standard, cut and paste it in there. It should be bullet pointed. We will discuss this. I want to get all of them listed, make sure they match. This is an audit point. This is an overall review of the quality management system and your operations, no less than annually. As I said earlier, if you decide you're going to do it more frequently, make sure you do it. We'll hold you accountable for that. Reassess opportunities for improvement, inputs, action items, all kinds of things. This is how we combine these. We have an agenda. The agenda recapitulates every single one of those topics. And then we have the meeting minutes. the date this was held, who was in attendance. Every single one of those topics was covered. Now, frequently, you won't have anything to discuss for one of these, so do you leave it blank? No. Nothing to discuss, not applicable, whatever. But the laundry list of topics are defined in the regulation. The expectation is that you touch on every one of them, even if it's to say there's nothing to discuss. Don't leave them blank. If you leave them blank, we assume you didn't do it at all, we'll write you up for it. All right, good stopping points, lunchtime. Make sure that these records are maintained. I guarantee they'll be looked at by every auditor.
And lunch is through the old engineering area here.
All right, excellent.
Everybody.